we are like the last generation that gets to decide this.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't get multiple shots at this. That's, I think, what a lot of the AI kind of futurists would say is like, yeah, we get this right or we get it wrong.
Yep.
So it's imperative that we, particularly I think as believers, lean in and try and help get it right.
Welcome to Cause and Effect, a podcast brought to you by the Dunham Podcast Network.
Here, we will provide a fresh voice that breaks down the most recent leadership lessons, fundraising trends, and the ups and downs within the nonprofit industry.
And our goal? Increasing your effectiveness for more impact.
Hey, welcome to this episode of the Cause and Effect podcast. I'm Trent Dunham, the president and CEO of Dunham+Company, and today our guest is James Poulter. JP, welcome.
Hey, nice to see you.
Back
again.
Always. Head of innovation at Dunham+Company. A lot of things that you've been up to recently. You've been all over the place.
Yeah, all over the place. Mostly talking to people about AI, as is my want at the moment. But actually a lot of people, really thinking differently about that topic. I think compared to when we even spoke about this a couple of months ago, there's been another turn just with what's going on in the public sphere, and we can talk about it. And just I think that people are really beginning to catch the momentum now around what's happening. So yeah, it's dragging me all over the country and across the pond on a regular basis now to speak about this. It's exciting.
Well, let's start by talking about kind of how organizations, when AI kind of first jumped on the scene, I'm not talking about decades ago as it first became a thing that people started working on, but more recently when it became more socialized, people began to use it in their personal lives, businesses began to invest significantly in it. Organizations began to have line items related to their AI strategy in implementation.
Yeah.
What, as it relates to organizational implementation or awareness of AI, are you seeing the chatter around or the desire to get better informed on or conquer really happening right now?
Yeah, I think the big turn that's happened in the past 6 months, really, when it comes to AI inside of organizations, is that I'd say we're out of what I might kind of call the word processor kind of mode.
Yeah.
At some point in kind of the late 80s, it became obvious to everyone that we were not going to have typewriters anymore and that we were going to use word processors to do the way that we created documents, right? Mm-hmm. And you can think about actually most of what modern work life looks like today is a kind of downstream effect of that. To talk about cause and effect, right? That's it.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting to that moment now with AI where there is becoming a general acceptance by most organizations, ministries, nonprofits, but big corporates, education institutions, that this thing isn't going to go away.
Yeah.
And that it actually does unlock a massive amount of productivity benefit if they choose to use it in the same way that the word processor did. And so now we don't have a team of typists anymore, right, that sit in the corner with typewriters. And in the same way, we don't have a team of people that have the computers and everyone else doesn't have the computer. We've adopted the word processor as the way that we get words out of our heads. And I think the next wave of that is we adopt AI as the way that we get words out of our heads. What that is breeding, though, is a kind of reappraisal of the first attempt at AI. So if you think that we're now, middle point of 2026, we're about 3.5 years on from when ChatGPT kind of first had its real kind of bump moment. Mm-hmm. When in the wake of that first moment, I think a lot of people that lead IT or lead technology in their organizations had a question around governance. And so they try to buy the most governable thing, which is mostly like Microsoft Copilot. Mm-hmm. And with good reason. And at the time, Copilot wasn't that far off of the frontier experience you could get from ChatGPT or other things. It's not really kept pace with that. And so now there's a reappraisal moment going on as they see the power of models coming from Anthropic and from OpenAI and from Google. But many people's AI of choice in their organization is the governable one, which is still Copilot. And it's got better, but it's not at the bleeding edge, both in terms of capability and usability. And so people are having to go through a reappraisal moment right now. And that's prompting a lot of looking again at what AI is actually capable of.
Yeah. So as we, as you spent time, with some of our clients on evaluating that for them, what are some of the things that you're finding are the most common situations they find themselves in. So is it like, hey, actually across your organization, there's 12 different AI platforms being used?
Probably more than 12 most of the time. I mean, there's some common culprits, right? But yeah, as with, I suppose it's most comparable to like when the iPhone came on the scene, lots of companies had handed out BlackBerries for a few years.
Yep.
And then the iPhone shows up into people's personal lives, and they're like, well, this is way better. I want to have this. And so they start either asking for it to come into their companies, or they just use it themselves anyway.
Yep.
The same thing is happening with AI, this whole idea of like shadow AI tools that are showing up in organizations, because we all find the path of least resistance most of the time as humans. So if people are facing into, I've got to use this tool, it's the one that's been bought, but it doesn't do what I want it to do, they're going to go looking elsewhere. And so many organizations are now having to deal with the fallout of that. People are flocking to Anthropic in particular to use Claude. We use it extensively here at Dunham, as well as tools like ChatGPT and Gemini if they're in a maybe Google-based organization, and many others as well, Perplexity. And those are the obvious ones because they're like the big chatbots.
Yeah.
But what's, I think, a real challenge for leaders is they're having to deal with AI, what I would often say, through the front door, the side door, and the back door. The front door is the obvious one, which is the tools like ChatGPT. You can see it show up on the credit card statement someone bought, an account. The side door is much harder to govern, which is, I'm sure many people listening are using things like Canva, or maybe you're doing a podcast and using StoryStream, or you might be using something like StreamYard for streaming. Like lots of other tools out there, or Riverside, for example, that we use for some of this. They all have AI in them now as well, right? So you might have an AI policy that says we don't use AI for this thing, and what most people think is, I can't use ChatGPT, but they're using AI tools and models through a lot of these other tools. That's the side door. The back door is the hard one, which is that a lot of the systems and tools that we use to communicate, and particularly for ministries that are trying to communicate, they are governed by AI systems. We don't think of them as that, but like Meta, TikTok, the Instagram algorithm, all of these different tools, certainly YouTube, there's a ton of AI going on in the back end of those systems that we don't really give much thought to. And yet, of course, they have a massive impact on our ministry and on our work. And so that's what people are having to face into. They've got to govern not just the obvious front door thing, but all of the other ways into the house as well.
The nonprofit landscape, we typically are years behind what happens in the for-profit space, partly because of budget, partly because of vision and entrepreneurial spirit and all the stuff. I was reading an article the other day that one of the challenges right now for boards and investors of big for-profit companies is feeling like the spend on AI is getting a little out of control.
Yeah.
And we would probably say is the opposite in our space, which is organizations are just starting to spend, line item to dollars on AI implementation within the nonprofit sector. So what can we learn from what's happening in the for-profit space? From that, from a budgetary standpoint.
Yeah, it's important to kind of unpack what that spend is made up of. In the corporate world, obviously you've got large organizations giving everyone access to Copilot and Claude or whatever it might be. But that's not really where that cost is coming from. It's a $20 a month license for someone, or maybe they're a power user, it's a $100 a month license. But you can kind of contain that. Where the cost is coming from is token usage through APIs. So these are what API stands for, application programming interface, right? Think of it like a pipe between two systems. The system at one end is the AI, and the system at the other end is maybe your website or your CRM or one of the other tools that you use. And when you use the AI through the API, you are burning tokens. You're not like contained by a monthly subscription cost. And these big models, particularly the most powerful models, so these are things like Fable 5 from Anthropic or Opus 5, their new models, or ChatGPT 5.6. These models are really capable, but they use a lot of tokens. So you can set them on a big task and off they go. And you won't always know how much they're going to use to accomplish that task. And sometimes you don't get the result you want from the tool because it's not actually really a tool. It's more like asking an employee to go and do something, if you don't constrain how long they're going to have to work on it, they might just keep going. And so that's where that cost is coming from. Inside of nonprofits, mostly we are trying to just get people to buy the tools in the first place, because they'll see the efficiency come from that. It's a slightly different challenge.
Yeah. It seems like, though, we've moved from the wrestle of should we be using AI to a new wrestle, which is where does it sit in our budget and where does it sit in our philosophical approach to our work, and
exactly
how does it fit with, so the front, side, and back door conversations are starting to happen more intentionally within organizations right now.
Yeah, and the challenge is it's not contained by like just the IT organization anymore. Every department or team being presented daily with new tools for their specific use case, right? So your legal team might be looking at using Harvey AI, which is an AI legal assistant. If you're using AI for like bid writing and fundraising, you might be looking at something like Razor or like Fundraise Up, and like some of these kind of different tools that have AI built into them. So there are a number of different challenges there, because it becomes the job often of the IT organization to manage all of that, but they may not really understand all the different tools that are being presented for those different use cases. So the problem's gotten a lot bigger.
So if that's the case, how does leadership begin to set the organization on the right path?
Yeah, that's a real challenge for many, because a lot of leaders don't want to have to start over again with this stuff. They don't want to have to learn how to use it. But the first thing, as with most things, is education, right? It's getting people to actually understand what's possible. And that means getting hands-on with these tools. I think, unlike many other things, you can't really theoretically talk about this stuff without really using it. It's like, again, trying to go through the argument of mobile phones again. Like, a lot of leaders didn't put up a resistance for very long about buying their team's mobile phones because they had one. They were using it all the time. They could see the benefit. You can understand why you would want that on you all the time. With AI, I think there's been a bit more resistance sometimes from leaders. Not everywhere, but in pockets. So the first thing is trying to get leaders to understand actually what's possible with these tools, and try and, I'd say, like, de-shame it a little bit. We talked about this before, as like, I think a lot of people are stuck between one of two modes, which is one, hey, I don't want to admit how much I'm using this stuff because it might look like I'm not the valuable player in the team. Yeah. And others who are being told, hey, we need you to use it, aren't using it as much as they could be for the exact same reason. They don't want to be seen as devalued either. So it's a kind of weird middle ground. And the way you unlock that is by, creating permission, right, and creating a safe space. And so, but you've got to do that with authenticity and being real about it. And so coming in and saying, hey, I want you to use this AI thing, but I don't really use it and I'm a bit scared of it and I don't want to touch it, kind of means that people probably aren't going to do so.
Yeah. Defining the role of AI, based on what the objectives are and all that kind of stuff. So putting a framework together, an implementation plan and strategy, which you may not be native to or inherent in the organization's skill set, the people that are there. So. No. I mean, that's where you've been brought in through Dunham+Co with a number of engagements just to help people build that framework.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're seeing that now with teams, is that actually, we just spent 2 days with a client with a whole group of their team talking through the challenges of this. I think what surprised them, and I think surprises a lot of people, is that we end up not really speaking a lot about AI. We end up talking about the people. And that's the reality of what this technology is doing, right? Is that as we use this to take away the administrative burden of running our ministries, we open up space to improve the human parts of the process. And the best way of working out where AI can be useful to you is discussing the human parts of the process where it's broken.
Yeah.
But that requires a lot of empathy and a lot of strategic thinking and open-handedness from people to admit that things need to be improved. But it's really powerful, I think, when people do that. So often in work, we run around trying to get things done and don't slow down enough to actually think about the way that we're trying to get that thing done. And, if your car's not running well, what do? Well, you park it up on the side and you get someone to actually tinker around with the internals and then have another go. You don't just keep driving slightly faster until it breaks. But that's kind of the way that we run a lot of our organizations. It's just like, okay, this isn't working. Can we go faster? Or this isn't working. Can I just add something on and add more load? And the same way with a car that's running and the radiator's about to explode. Like, throwing a bunch of luggage in the back is not going to help the problem. the only thing that you can do really is slow down. So that's what we're trying to get people to do, I think, is that this topic can be scary because of the pace of change. Like people, I think, are feeling like, I've got to keep up with this. I've got to keep up with it. And that's, that it is fast. There's no changing, there's no running away from that. But actually, for most people, they're not anywhere near the frontier of this thing anyway.
Right.
So even if you caught up to what was the frontier from 6 months ago, you might be doing things completely differently at this stage. And most of us need to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the charge if you're watching or listening today, which is the takeaway from this conversation is, have you had those conversations internally? Do you have a plan or a framework, an implementation plan? Do you have guardrails? Do you have governance? And if you haven't answered those questions, you're probably going to have to go outside the organization to begin to get those questions answered. Someone like JP that can help you work through that process. So it's important because if you don't do it, you're going to do it at some point.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Like, come back to the word processor, right? You could ignore it for a while if you want to, but the world around you is going to change. And I can understand why that's uncomfortable for some people. Most of us don't want to change, right?
Yeah.
But actually, we're not afraid of change, really. I think this is what people often get wrong about like digital transformation or change management, is that people aren't afraid of change. We're very adaptable as people. God made us that way, to be adaptable to our circumstances. What we're often afraid of is the unknown. I think that's the real challenge for leaders, is you've got to communicate a vision of where you're trying to get to. And then people will go with whatever the process is to get there if they can get on board with what the vision is. But if all you're saying is, we need to change, we need to change, we need to change, that's going to breed frustration. It's going to scare people if you can't communicate what it is that you're trying to change into. And I think if more leaders sat down and said, what we're trying to do is get fitter, faster, stronger, so that we can deliver on our mission and our impact in the world. And the way we're going to do that is through this. You would see much better results.
It's a good takeaway. Kind of want to shift topics a little bit.
Sure.
So we kind of talk about organizational process, how we think about implementing and embracing AI in the right space and right way. Shift topics. So recently there was a jailbreak.
Yeah.
Maybe describe for our listeners and viewers kind of what happened, what does that prompt us to consider, think about, as it relates to AI?
Are you a fan of the Mission Impossible movies?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, who's not?
Okay, well, I don't want to spoil this for anybody, but like in one of those movies, there is an AI that kind of goes rogue, right? It becomes uncontrollable. It gets out of its container and starts wreaking some havoc. Now, this wasn't kind of a situation that Tom Cruise needs to kind of parachute in to solve.
Yeah.
But something not far off of that happened just the past week or so. The new model from OpenAI, a future version of ChatGPT, was in a testing scenario, which means it was in a sandbox. It was in a kind of contained environment. It wasn't given access to the internet. And its objective was to pass a benchmark. A benchmark is essentially a series of tests that you run on an AI model to work out how capable it is of doing something. That lots of these different benchmarks exist. And it was trying to pass a benchmark. To work out how to pass that benchmark, it realized that it didn't have access to the knowledge it needed. And so chose to try and find a security exploit in its sandbox, kind of like trying to find a kind of break in the wall somewhere. And it found that break in the wall and got out. It got access to the open internet. And then to find the information it needed to go find another AI model that had that information. And so it found a website called Hugging Face, which is a funny name for a website. But Hugging Face is a platform where you host a bunch of publicly available open source AI models. And so it hacked into Hugging Face to go and find this model. Now, this was discovered by Hugging Face. They realized that there was some kind of attack. They routed it back to OpenAI and they were able to shut it down and have a conversation with OpenAI. But what this has unveiled is that these models are now getting to a level of capability where they can become uncontrollable in the right circumstances, or the wrong circumstances, perhaps, depending on how you look at it. And I mean, this obviously paints some science fiction kind of scary portraits, right?
Real dude.
But what's probably most notable about this happening is how predictable it was that it would happen. There have been multiple, both science fiction and research-based future models predictions that this was going to happen. I think at Summit a couple of years ago, I shared this paper called AI 2027, which is this prediction of how by the mid-2027 period, so about a year from now, we might get to the point where AI gets smart enough to be what's called a super intelligent researcher, where it can be smart enough to train other AI models. And at that point, you get what's known as takeoff, which is where AI is no longer bound by the speed that humans can train it, can just train itself. In that prediction, they thought that by Christmas of 2026, this might happen, that we might get an AI that can jump the shark, so to speak, get out of its container. And here we are, and it's only June, July, and it's happened already. So it's highly predictable this was going to happen. Not surprising, because almost everything that these models are trained on has got a load of science fiction in it, where guess what happens? There's a bunch of content there about AIs getting out of the box. So no surprise that it would try and do so.
Yeah.
It's scary.
How do we think about this? How do we put it in the right context? What should we be aware of, concerned about, or actually not really concerned about?
I mean, are you concerned? Does it make you concerned?
I don't know. I think that's it's an interesting data point.
Yeah.
It's like, to your point, totally can understand and see how that could happen.
Yeah.
What are the implications for the future? How does it not go out of control? Help us put it in a framework.
Well, and the reason I ask you is because I think that, it's a fun story, right? It's an interesting thing that happened. I guarantee most people didn't even know it happened.
Yep.
And if you are maybe a leaned in, kind of like newspaper daily reader, and you like watch the news a couple of times a day, you might have heard about it. But give it 2 weeks, and unless this keeps happening, you're not going to be thinking about this.
Yeah.
But the reality is that is a warning shot of how powerful this stuff is going to be over the next couple of years. Now, we can do things about it. You need these moments in almost all technological development where the world wakes up and goes, oh, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about now. We've got to do something about this. Now, could all of the people that were doing this testing have said that we're doing this? Get prepared? Yeah, they could have done. Right? So I think one of the big things we've got to, as Christians, I think particularly, thoughtfully think about what is the right regulation and structure around these tools and systems, because they are going to be ever more powerful and capable than they are right now. I live in London in the UK. We've just had a change of prime minister again. Yeah, that happens a lot in our country, as you might have noticed. We've just elected, though, we didn't elect him, but Andy Burnham, now being the prime minister, has just appointed the first AI minister into the cabinet. So someone at the top tier of the British government whose sole responsibility is to think about AI and AI governance. I think that's going to become much more commonplace in most countries of the world. But the challenge is that these models are not built in the UK. They're not built in Europe. They're mostly built here in America and increasingly built in China. And so we're going to need some international cooperation around this stuff. So I think as Christians, we can be praying for the people that are in these seats of power who can control this stuff, who have a lot of influence in the world and increasing amounts of influence. And so I think we need to be lobbying for the safety of all people to be considered and honored in that work, because that's a big challenge for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. What a time to be alive, man. I mean, just
right. It is. It's huge, and I think that's why I feel like a real burden around this stuff, because we are like the last generation that gets to decide this.
Yeah.
You don't get multiple shots at this. That's I think what a lot of the AI kind of futurists would say is like, we get this right or we get it wrong.
Yep.
So it's imperative that we, particularly I think as believers, lean in and try and help get it right.
It's good. It's a good charge. Good charge. We can't ignore it. It's here. How are we implementing it well for our organization and giving guardrails? That's probably the main part of our conversation today, and where we need to be focused. So, well, it's always mentally stimulating to have a conversation with you, JP, and thanks for your
glad to do it, man.
Commitment to helping organizations figure this out well and how to use it to benefit kingdom purposes, which we need to be right on the front foot of. So
that's right.
Appreciate you. Thanks for watching or listening to today's episode of the Cause and Effect podcast. Join us again next time.
And thanks for listening to the Cause and Effect podcast, a resource developed by Dunham+Company.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. In the meantime, do us a favor. If you like this content, subscribe, share us with a friend, leave us a review on your podcast provider, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Dunham+Company to help us spread the word.
Thanks again, and join us next time as we work together towards increased effectiveness for more impact.